Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. It was late March in Ontario, a quiet night, a peaceful street, a mother of two likely getting ready for bed in her suburban home. But by morning, that same home would become the subject of a death investigation. Headlines would read, "Local woman found dead, signs of trauma." There was no break-in, no screams, no witnesses, just silence, and a body. The man last seen near the house told police he was just stopping by, checking in. But the truth, buried in call logs, surveillance footage, and overlooked red flags, was darker than anyone expected. And the first thing investigators noticed, everything seemed a little too quiet, a little too clean. The incident took place in Ajax, a suburb in the Durham region of Ontario, on March 30th, 2024, a Saturday night, a region known for being calm, residential, safe. But as law enforcement often learns, crime doesn't always arrive with sound or warning. Sometimes it hides in routine. Police were dispatched to a home on Hillman Drive just after 11 p.m. in response to what dispatch classified as an unknown trouble call. The caller wasn't a resident. It wasn't a family member. It wasn't a neighbor reporting suspicious movement. It was someone driving by who noticed the front door of the house wide open and the lights on for an unusually long time. What officers found inside the house was a scene that appeared deceptively ordinary. No signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no blood spatter across the walls, just one person inside the home, Jennifer Polak, age 45. She was unresponsive in the bedroom. Facial trauma was visible. EMS confirmed she was deceased at the scene. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, no signs of defensive wounds visible to the eye, no weapon in sight. But the nature of her injuries ruled out natural causes immediately. The lead officer on site noted the clear presence of obvious trauma to the head and face area, but nothing suggested an intruder. Everything else was orderly. The front door had been unlocked but not damaged. The only other person found at the house and questioned immediately was a man claiming to be checking in. Police didn't name him publicly that night. They didn't need to. Not yet. What they needed to do first was secure the scene and begin treating it as a homicide. Crime scene technicians conducted their initial walkthrough, photographing each room, including the master bedroom where Jennifer's body lay. No blood pooling in adjacent rooms, no obvious transfer patterns. Nothing had been moved or touched post-mortem. Based on rigor and lividity, she had been dead less than 2 hours when responders arrived. That placed the time of death somewhere between 9 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. The body was transported to the coroner's office for autopsy. Technicians remained behind to document everything: the mattress placement, bed linens, electronics, bathroom sinks, and door handles. A full forensic sweep was scheduled for the following morning. Jennifer's cell phone was recovered on the nightstand. Screen locked, battery at 62%. Investigators bagged it for analysis. A second phone, not registered in Jennifer's name, was located in the kitchen junk drawer. But perhaps the most unusual detail was this: there was no apparent attempt to hide the body. Whoever caused her death didn't flee in a hurry and didn't try to conceal what they had done. The scene wasn't frenzied, it was deliberate. At this stage, police weren't pointing fingers, but they had one unshakable fact: Jennifer was dead, and someone had been inside her home when it happened. The next morning, March 31st, 2024, investigators returned for a secondary sweep. They examined the doorframe and lock, no pry marks. A quiet entry, either someone she knew or someone who had access. The neighbors were interviewed. A few recalled hearing a bump or muffled sound sometime after 10 p.m., but nothing they considered alarming. None had seen anyone enter or leave the property that night. One house down, a family's home surveillance camera pointed toward the sidewalk. The footage became the first potential lead: a silver four-door sedan parked outside Jennifer's home at 9:51 p.m. The headlights went dark. The car remained there until 11:03 p.m. when it pulled away slowly. The timestamp lined up almost perfectly with the initial 911 call. The plate? Partial, captured at an angle, but not unreadable. Investigators flagged it for follow-up. Meanwhile, Jennifer's body underwent autopsy at the Ontario Forensic Pathology Service in Toronto. The preliminary findings confirmed blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a single impact event. No additional internal injuries, no signs of suffocation or restraint. Toxicology was clean. No drugs, no alcohol. Time of death? Estimated between 9:30 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. The report ruled the death homicide. What remained unknown, however, was the method. No weapon had been recovered, no fingerprints yet, no visible motive, no confession. Jennifer's family was informed of her death. Her children were placed with their aunt, pending further arrangements. The media had already begun to pick up the story. Local woman, 45, found dead in Ajax home. Police investigating as homicide, no suspects named. But among investigators, the focus was narrowing. If there was no break-in, no burglary, no signs of struggle, then whoever did this was either invited or was already expected. Someone Jennifer knew. Maybe someone she trusted. Most murders begin long before the body is found, one investigator remarked. The question is, did she see it coming? Or did she ignore the signs? The first 24 hours of a homicide investigation are often the most critical. But in cases like this, where there's no forced entry, no eyewitnesses, and no clear motive, progress hinges less on urgency and more on establishing who the victim was and who had access to her life. Jennifer Polak was born and raised in Ontario. By all accounts, she lived a private and structured life. She worked as a preschool teacher at Apple Tree Preschool in Ajax, where she had been employed for several years. She had 2 children, both minors, who lived primarily with her after a divorce finalized in 2021. According to coworkers and friends, Jennifer maintained limited contact with her ex-husband, focusing instead on her children's education, her job, and more recently, a quiet dating relationship. Investigators began assembling a timeline not just of her final hours, but of her routines over the past several weeks. The objective: identify stressors, interpersonal conflicts, behavioral changes, or any unexplained interruptions to her day-to-day life. One early concern emerged. Jennifer had stopped posting publicly on social media 2 weeks before her death. Prior to that, she'd shared regular photos of classroom crafts, weekend activities with her kids, and birthday celebrations. That digital silence stood out, not as a red flag on its own, but as a break in pattern. Friends later told police that Jennifer had grown more withdrawn in the past month. She was described as quiet by nature, but coworkers noticed she had started leaving work precisely on time, something unusual for her given that she often stayed late to prep materials. One teacher, who asked not to be identified, said Jennifer had stopped carpooling with her in March. She cited needing space as the reason. That same teacher remembered Jennifer once saying, "Sometimes I just need to feel like I'm in control of my own schedule." There had been no formal complaints made to the school, no documented safety concerns. But this pattern of subtle withdrawal, paired with her decision to stop driving her usual route home, led investigators to consider whether Jennifer had felt surveilled or constrained in the weeks leading up to her death. Her phone, now in possession of the Durham Regional Police's Digital Forensics Unit, offered further clues. Text threads between Jennifer and a close friend revealed a growing discomfort with someone she described only as K. In one message dated March 20th, she wrote, "K's been dropping by unannounced again. Not sure if I'm being paranoid, but it's making me anxious. I just need some space." The same contact asked if she wanted to stay over for a few days. Jennifer declined. "I'm fine. He just doesn't like when I don't answer right away." It's not a big deal. 10 days later, she was dead. Another data point came from a short audio note Jennifer recorded in her phone's voice memos app. It was time-stamped March 26th, 4 days before her death. The recording was less than a minute long and contained ambient noise, but one clear line could be heard. "He said if I ever shut him out again, I'd regret it, but I can't live like this." Jennifer never shared the file with anyone. Investigators found it during a secondary data sweep buried among notes and old reminders. It wasn't admissible as direct evidence, but it gave context, valuable context, to her psychological state and her sense of growing unease. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed neighbors, family members, and friends to identify recent visitors to Jennifer's house. Surveillance from the home next door had already captured one specific vehicle, silver, 4-door sedan, appearing multiple nights that week, always after 9 p.m. A neighbor noted the car often sat idling for long periods with its lights off. She assumed it was someone waiting for Jennifer to come home. She never thought to report it. The investigation now centered around determining whether Jennifer had taken any formal steps to protect herself. Records showed she had not filed for a restraining order. There were no calls to police services from her address in the 3 months prior. However, officers confirmed Jennifer had called the Durham Domestic Violence Helpline twice, once in February and once in March, seeking advice on nonviolent but controlling behavior in a relationship. Both calls were logged as information only, meaning no active intervention was triggered. Jennifer didn't name the person she was referring to. Cases like this often expose the difficult gap between discomfort and danger, between a woman who feels uneasy and a system that requires visible escalation before offering formal protection. Investigators made note of this during case briefings. One detective reportedly said, "She didn't report abuse, but she left a trail of discomfort that tells you she didn't feel safe. That needs to mean something." Beyond digital traces and neighbor observations, police also reviewed Jennifer's recent purchase history. Receipts showed a home security system ordered online in mid-March, but not yet installed. The unopened box was found in her hallway closet. There was also a purchase of a second prepaid cell phone, paid in cash, on March 22nd at a nearby electronics store. The device was found inside a kitchen drawer, barely used. It had only one number saved under the contact name Backup. No calls had been made or received. These items suggested a person beginning to prepare for self-protection, but not one who had reached out for enforcement. It painted a picture of quiet alarm, of someone weighing options, someone cautious, not reactive. At this stage of the investigation, no suspect had been arrested, but the forensic picture was building slowly around patterns, not explosions. Jennifer Polak didn't vanish. She wasn't taken in the night. She was found exactly where she lived. The investigation wasn't a search for what happened. It was a search for who knew she would be alone, and what they chose to do about it. By April 1st, 2024, 2 days after Jennifer Polak was found dead in her bedroom, the focus of the investigation narrowed to the forensic processing of her residence. The first responder walkthrough had confirmed the presence of trauma. Now the forensic unit would determine how that trauma was inflicted, and whether the crime scene could tell investigators something the victim never had the chance to say. Durham Regional Police secured the scene for a second full day of detailed processing. The location, a modest 2-story home on Hillman Drive in Ajax, Ontario. This wasn't a large estate or an isolated cabin, just a regular house in a quiet residential neighborhood. But as any forensic investigator will tell you, violence doesn't require complexity, it only needs opportunity. The entry point was examined first. The front door had no damage. The lock was functional and showed no signs of tampering. No pry marks, no scratches, no splinters. The deadbolt had not been engaged. Investigators concluded the door had likely been unlocked voluntarily or never locked at all. Inside, the home was undisturbed. No broken furniture, no disarray. The bedroom, however, told a more specific story. Jennifer was found lying on the left side of the queen-sized bed. The comforter had been pulled halfway over her body. Her phone was on the nightstand. There was no blood spatter across the walls or ceiling, but the pillowcase beneath her head was stained. Analysis would later confirm the presence of high-velocity impact patterns, evidence consistent with blunt force trauma to the skull. The medical examiner's preliminary findings had noted the absence of hesitation wounds or multiple strikes. A single blow, forceful, precise. A potential weapon had not been recovered from the scene. However, latent blood trace was identified under UV light on the edge of the nightstand, likely transferred from an object used and then removed. This object left a partial dust-free imprint on the surface. It was roughly rectangular, approximately 12 inches in length. Analysts could not definitively determine the item, but noted it was consistent with a household tool or personal item, possibly metal. Forensic technicians used luminol across all major floor areas. There were no blood trails or transfer patterns outside the bedroom. No evidence of a dragged body. Jennifer had likely died in the position where she was discovered. In the bathroom adjacent to the bedroom, 2 damp towels were located, folded but warm at time of collection. The sink handle had partial touch DNA later matched to Jennifer. No other profiles were present on that surface. The absence of mixed DNA in this area complicated theories of a cleanup attempt. In the hallway, the floor was clean, but not pristine. A single partial footprint was found using chemical enhancement. The impression was consistent with a men's athletic shoe, size 11 or 12. The tread pattern aligned with a brand sold at major retailers, but not distinctive enough to isolate to one pair. Next, investigators turned their attention to the kitchen. On the counter sat a reusable grocery bag with receipt-dated items from earlier that afternoon. Milk, fruit, canned goods. The timestamp placed her at a local store around 3:45 p.m. This provided a confirmed living activity within 6 hours of estimated time of death. Her purse was located on a chair near the dining table. Wallet, keys, ID, all accounted for. No money missing. Her second cell phone, the prepaid device purchased days prior, remained in a kitchen drawer, unused. That phone was powered off, battery intact. Notably, the home's smart thermostat log showed a manual adjustment to 68 degrees at exactly 9:36 p.m. on the night of the homicide. This setting change was consistent with Jennifer's known habits. Investigators believed she had been alive at that time. However, a second adjustment, down to 65 degrees, occurred at 11:08 p.m., 3 minutes after the 911 call. Police determined Jennifer could not have made that change. The working theory: whoever remained in the home after her death adjusted the setting before leaving. Technicians downloaded the home's Wi-Fi logs. The system showed a device connecting to the network briefly at 9:52 p.m., disconnecting around 11:01 p.m. That MAC address did not match Jennifer's primary phone. The signature was cross-referenced and traced to a different device, later determined to belong to a person of interest. That detail was not disclosed publicly at the time. When the forensic team completed their work, a clearer sequence had emerged. Jennifer had been home by 4:00 p.m. She was alive as of 9:36 p.m. Her thermostat logs and Wi-Fi activity filled in key gaps. The estimated time of death remained between 9:45 and 10:15 p.m. The perpetrator stayed in the house long enough to adjust settings, gather belongings, and leave no fingerprints behind. No forced entry, no signs of a robbery, no struggle. But now, the scene revealed something more specific. Someone was comfortable enough to be inside that home, unhurried, after ending a life. Forensic investigators noted this pattern wasn't typical of break-ins or spontaneous attacks. It indicated familiarity, access, time, and possibly confidence. That's what made the thermostat detail important, because adjusting temperature, especially after a violent act, isn't instinctual. It's deliberate. It's domestic. One of the lead technicians remarked, off-camera, "You don't tweak the heat in a place you've just broken into. You only do that when the house already feels like yours." This crime didn't begin at the moment of impact. It had started earlier, in the hallway, at the door, maybe even months before. By April 3, 2024, the investigation into the murder of Jennifer Polak had passed the threshold from scene documentation to suspect identification. The forensic team had completed their sweep. The autopsy results were consistent, and the data logs, Wi-Fi access, temperature controls, and digital footprints pointed toward a single presence in the home that night, aside from Jennifer. That presence now had a name. His name was Kyle Severin. Investigators had known the name early. In fact, his was the only name that kept coming up, both directly and between the lines. He was Jennifer's boyfriend, or had been. The relationship status wasn't clearly defined at the time of her death, and that lack of clarity had suddenly become critical. What mattered to detectives wasn't the romantic timeline. It was proximity, access, motive, and history. Kyle, 35 years old, resided in Pickering, a short drive from Jennifer's home in Ajax. He had no fixed employment at the time of the investigation. Police records confirmed that he had a pending court date related to a 2022 sexual assault charge involving a minor. The charge hadn't been adjudicated yet, but Kyle had failed to appear in court in late 2023, prompting a bench warrant that was later rescinded. He had no active warrants at the time of Jennifer's death, but his name was known to law enforcement. That became more concerning when detectives reviewed Kyle's prior domestic contacts. In 2021, he had been involved in a disturbance report filed by a former partner. The woman, whose identity remains protected, accused Kyle of unwanted surveillance, including showing up at her workplace without notice, tracking her online activity, and calling repeatedly after their breakup. No charges were filed. She later declined to testify in any legal proceeding. This behavioral pattern now raised red flags, and it aligned with the surveillance video footage recovered near Jennifer's house. Detectives had already traced the silver sedan captured on March 30th to a vehicle registered under Kyle Severin's name. License plate partials matched, and metadata from a traffic camera 2 blocks away confirmed the same vehicle turning onto Hillman Drive at 9:47 p.m. The car did not leave until after 11 p.m., consistent with thermostat log entries and Wi-Fi access at the home. Investigators pulled Kyle's phone records. The analysis revealed that his device connected briefly to Jennifer's Wi-Fi network on March 30th between 9:52 p.m. and 11:01 p.m. This contradicted his initial verbal statement during a non-custodial interview on April 1st, where he claimed he hadn't seen Jennifer in a few days and had no reason to be in Ajax that weekend. More inconsistencies surfaced in Kyle's digital footprint. GPS metadata from a fitness tracking app on his smartwatch, synced through his personal email, placed him within 100 meters of Jennifer's address at the time of the homicide. The device had gone into airplane mode at 9:49 p.m., but GPS pinged before and after the offline period, showing a start location near his residence and an endpoint near Jennifer's. This gap created a forensic void, but the pattern surrounding it narrowed the possibilities. He was there, and he didn't tell police. In a case where physical evidence was sparse and no eyewitness had come forward, the digital trail became the strongest line of corroboration. The Wi-Fi connection alone placed Kyle inside the house during the estimated window of death. When combined with the absence of forced entry and Jennifer's recorded apprehension about Kay from prior texts and voice memos, detectives believed they had sufficient grounds to escalate Kyle from person of interest to suspect. However, they proceeded carefully. The case was not yet in court, and though the forensic sequencing was strong, it lacked two critical elements: a murder weapon and direct admission of involvement. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Kyle's residence. The search was executed on April 4th. Officers recovered a pair of men's sneakers consistent with the partial shoe print lifted from Jennifer's hallway. They also seized a black duffel bag containing clothes, recently laundered but with trace elements of blood on the zipper lining. Preliminary testing confirmed the presence of human blood, but not the source. Further DNA testing was ordered. Inside Kyle's garage, a hammer was found inside a storage container. The hammer had no visible blood or tissue. However, it was of a weight and dimension consistent with the nightstand imprint observed at Jennifer's home. It was also missing from her household inventory list, meaning the weapon might not have originated from her residence. Still, even with the hardware, the timeline held: a smart thermostat change at 11:08 p.m., a digital disconnect at 11:01, and a departure caught by surveillance shortly after. One detective later noted, "The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem." It was as if the gaps had been pre-managed, removed just enough to prevent a clear shot, but not enough to erase the direction of fire. But what you couldn't erase was proximity, opportunity, and pattern. Jennifer had once described her growing anxiety to a friend by saying she felt like someone else was controlling when she was allowed to relax. Now investigators had a clear line of evidence showing Kyle's presence in her space, without her documented consent, on the night she died. That evidence wasn't emotional, it was procedural, and it was about to move the case forward. When we talk about domestic homicide cases, especially ones involving intimate partners, there's a disturbing pattern investigators are often forced to confront: escalating control that manifests digitally long before it turns physical. In the case of Jennifer Polak and Kyle Severin, this pattern was not only present, it was exhaustively documented. As forensic teams continued processing the home where Jennifer's body had been discovered in April 2024, a parallel digital forensics operation was underway. Her smartphone, found in her handbag near the kitchen table, was submitted to the Ontario Provincial Police's Cyber Crimes Unit. The device was intact but password protected. Within hours, they successfully unlocked it using legal access authorization granted post-mortem and biometric confirmation from her fingerprint. What investigators found inside was a clear and harrowing timeline of coercive control. Text messages from Kyle Severin stretched back over 2 years. At first, they were mundane, routine check-ins, weekend plans, affectionate language, but by late 2023, the tone had shifted. Kyle's messages became increasingly accusatory. He asked for Jennifer's location multiple times a day. When she didn't reply within 10 minutes, he followed up with demands. "Where the hell are you? Are you ignoring me again?" Cross-referencing Kyle's phone revealed matching entries. But he had also installed a third-party location tracking app disguised as a family safety tool, something Jennifer had never explicitly consented to. According to tech forensics, it had been installed on her phone in December 2023 during a weekend when they stayed at his apartment. She likely didn't know it existed. The app logged her location in real time. Its last ping from her phone occurred around 3:12 p.m. on the day of her death. The data revealed that Jennifer had arrived home from work just 20 minutes before emergency services were called. This gave investigators a tight window, and within that window, the digital trail deepened. Jennifer's Google search history, backed up to her cloud, showed she had been researching protection orders, signs of narcissistic abuse, and phrases like how to safely leave an emotionally abusive relationship. One search dated 3 days before her death read, "Can you file a restraining order without telling your partner?" These findings were not merely background noise. They became key supporting evidence of premeditated behavior patterns. Kyle had deleted multiple messages from his own phone, but Jennifer's cloud backup contained screenshots of several arguments she appeared to have documented for her own protection. One of those screenshots, dated March 29, 2024, showed Kyle threatening to make her regret ever turning on him. Meanwhile, officers obtained surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera. The footage didn't capture the incident itself, but did show Kyle entering Jennifer's home at approximately 2:58 p.m. on the day of the incident, carrying what appeared to be a sports duffel bag. He left in handcuffs about 90 minutes later. What he brought in, investigators still haven't fully disclosed, but inside the bag, found near the front door, were duct tape, gloves, and Jennifer's broken tablet. The tablet was crucial. Although the screen was cracked and the device initially non-functional, digital forensics recovered fragments of deleted video files. One of them, only 5 seconds long, showed Kyle yelling directly at Jennifer in what appeared to be their living room. The timestamp? Just 1 week before her death. To build a prosecution case for second-degree murder, the Crown needed to establish not just cause of death, but intent, escalation, and opportunity. The digital footprint helped bridge the psychological timeline, offering a chilling, methodical outline of Kyle's controlling behavior long before he ever laid a hand on her. But perhaps what remains most chilling wasn't just what Jennifer had saved, but what she hadn't yet deleted. Among the fragments of her notes app, investigators found an unfinished letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a string of thoughts. "I don't know how to leave without making things worse. But I'm starting to think not leaving will be worse than anything else." She never got the chance to finish that sentence. Investigators later confirmed Jennifer had consulted a local domestic violence support organization in mid-March, asking about transitional housing and legal options. She hadn't filed for a protection order yet, but she was gathering information, clearly preparing. Statistically, this is the most dangerous period in an abusive relationship, the point at which the victim signals a break. That break is often when violence turns lethal. Jennifer was aware she was in danger. She took steps, she documented, she researched, she reached out. And in the end, even all of that couldn't keep her safe. There's an urgent question that lingers after cases like this. Are we doing enough to act on red flags when they're digital, not visible? The days following Jennifer Polak's death were marked by silence, not from the public, not from Jennifer's devastated family, but from the only person who'd last seen her alive, Kyle Severin. April 11th, 2024. By now, the forensic unit had completed 2 full sweeps of the home on Steeles Avenue in Ontario. What they found didn't scream, it whispered. But those whispers built into something louder than words. First, the blood evidence. Contrary to Kyle's initial claims that he'd left Jennifer in perfectly normal condition that evening, luminol testing revealed several small blood traces on the bedroom carpet near the edge of the bed. Not a pool, not spatter, but smears. Cleaned, deliberately. Crime scene analysts noted swipe patterns and partial hand transfer, consistent with an attempt to wipe or reposition a body. Blood spatter analyst Stephen Halford documented this in his affidavit. The blood belonged to Jennifer. Second, the fracture reports. The autopsy had finalized. Jennifer suffered blunt force trauma to the back of her head and a hairline fracture near her left eye socket. Forensic pathologist Dr. L. Micallef concluded the injuries occurred within minutes of death, likely during a single rapid escalation. Defensive wounds were notably absent. There was no struggle, which led to a theory. She was taken by surprise, from behind. The report was handed to detectives on April 12th. With it came a critical observation. The wounds matched the dimensions of a home dumbbell. Kyle had claimed during initial interviews that he'd been reorganizing workout equipment recently, but couldn't recall where he'd left all the gear. The dumbbell in question? Missing. Third, the text message pattern. When investigators subpoenaed Jennifer's phone records, a curious gap emerged. On the night of April 6th, all outgoing messages stopped at 7:14 p.m. This was uncharacteristic. Jennifer typically messaged her teenage daughter goodnight by 9. She never did. The absence of further phone activity between 7:14 p.m. and the estimated time of death between 7:30 p.m. to 9 o'clock p.m. aligned with what detectives called a digital blackout window. The most damning part? Kyle's phone showed a sudden flurry of deleted texts around the same time frame, and the home Wi-Fi router logs proved his phone remained in the house. Yet he claimed he was out for air, but no GPS pings left the house perimeter until nearly 10:40 p.m. That's when Kyle's phone reconnected to a service tower along Highway 407, heading west. Investigators started forming a working theory. Kyle may have attempted to discard the murder weapon or other evidence before returning around midnight. A dumpster site was later located near that area, but city waste collection had already occurred. On April 14th, a forensic entomologist was called to examine the scene again. It may seem unusual, but a single fly larva discovered under the bed frame, matching Jennifer's time of death window, proved that her body had not been moved for several hours after death. Kyle's claims of leaving her while she was fine were falling apart, biologically. Still, prosecutors remained cautious. Motive had not been formally stated, and the charge, second-degree murder, meant they needed not just proof of death and deception, but evidence of intent. Behind closed doors, Kyle maintained his silence. No confession, no explanation, but no alternate theory of who might have entered, inflicted fatal trauma, attempted to clean the scene, and vanished without trace. Silence may serve in court, but in forensics, it's often the loudest admission. By mid-May 2024, weeks after Jennifer Polak was found dead inside her home in Ontario, the investigation had reached a critical point. While the physical autopsy had confirmed blunt force trauma as the cause of death, consistent with injuries sustained from repeated strikes, it was the digital trail that began to offer clarity on what transpired in her final hours. Forensic analysts began with Jennifer's smartphone, recovered from a nightstand near her body. Although the screen had been shattered and the SIM card forcibly removed, the device was not encrypted. Using forensic software, investigators extracted a timeline of activity, including GPS coordinates, deleted messages, and call logs. A deleted iMessage thread with Kyle Severin had been wiped around 2 a.m. on the night of her death. The recovery tool restored partial texts, enough to establish that a heated argument had taken place hours before the estimated time of death. Further analysis of Kyle Severin's devices, obtained under a search warrant, revealed more concerning data. His iCloud account, though partially wiped, still contains synced notes and screenshots, some referencing Jennifer by name. One note read, "If she runs her mouth again, I swear I'm done." Dated just 5 days before Jennifer's death, it added weight to the prosecution's evolving theory of premeditation. Investigators also examined Kyle's online search history. On April 10th, 3 days before Jennifer's death, he searched, "How long bruises last on corpse?" followed by, "Can phone GPS be turned off remotely?" These alone didn't prove intent, but they contributed to a growing pattern. The digital footprint wasn't isolated. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's front-facing Ring camera placed Kyle's vehicle outside Jennifer's home from 11:34 p.m. to 3:22 a.m. the night she died, well beyond the time he told officers during his initial interview. Back inside the residence, forensic evidence supported the timeline. Luminol testing in the bedroom showed blood spatter invisible to the naked eye, traveling laterally, suggesting Jennifer was struck while lying on the bed. DNA swabs from the corner of the headboard matched Kyle Severin's profile, along with fingerprints on the doorframe. Investigators concluded that the initial assault likely occurred in the bedroom, and she may have attempted to crawl toward the hallway before succumbing to her injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, robbery, or struggle with a third party. In the middle of this, law enforcement uncovered one more crucial piece of the puzzle: Jennifer's private email account. She had been emailing a domestic abuse support group in the weeks prior. One message, dated March 30th, stated, I've been scared lately. He's unpredictable after drinking. I don't know if I'm overreacting, but something feels wrong. The email was not shared with family or friends. It became the foundation for the Crown to argue that Jennifer feared for her life and had taken small steps to document her concerns. When paired with physical and digital evidence, the narrative emerged as not just reactive violence, but as part of a wider cycle of control and escalation. As a storyteller examining this case, it's worth pausing here, not to sensationalize, but to reflect on the many women who do reach out quietly without anyone knowing. Jennifer didn't post on social media. She didn't file for a restraining order. She just wrote an email. And for too many, even that is the final step they ever take. To complete the picture, investigators brought in digital behavior experts to analyze Kyle's patterns. His Instagram showed a series of posts weeks prior that painted a different story. Photos of dinners with Jennifer, comments calling her the best thing in my life. But the illusion of stability online often conceals what happens behind closed doors. The evidence, now corroborated across devices, timelines, witness statements, and digital metadata, gave prosecutors what they needed to prepare for a strong charge: second-degree murder, consistent with a pattern of domestic abuse, sustained control, and fatal escalation. Kyle Severin was denied bail, with the Crown arguing he posed a risk of flight and potential harm to other witnesses. 1 year after Jennifer Polak was found dead in her Ontario home, Kyle Severin stood trial for second-degree murder. The physical evidence was irrefutable: blunt force trauma, no signs of forced entry, and forensic blood pattern analysis that confirmed a close-range assault. Jennifer's injuries, deep lacerations and cranial fractures, were inconsistent with any accidental fall. Digital forensics recovered a deleted voice memo on Kyle's phone. It wasn't a full confession, but the words "I didn't mean to" added weight to the Crown's case. Friends testified Jennifer had expressed fear that she was planning to end the relationship. One co-worker recalled Jennifer saying Kyle had started showing up uninvited at her job. Kyle's defense leaned on panic, claiming he found her unconscious and didn't call for help out of fear, but the jury didn't buy it. After 8 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict: guilty. The judge sentenced Kyle to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. Jennifer's family gave a brief, powerful statement in court. She tried to handle things quietly. That cost her everything. In the aftermath, advocacy groups used her case to push for stronger protections in non-marital relationships. Jennifer's story became a quiet warning about control, silence, and the cost of waiting too long to leave. I've shared Jennifer's story not just to tell you what happened, but to remind us what silence can cost. If you ever feel unsafe, or if someone close to you seems to be hiding pain, don't wait. Speak, ask, help. Sometimes, what saves a life is the one person who notices and doesn't look away. What do you think could have changed the outcome for Jennifer? Have you ever missed a sign you wish you'd seen sooner? If this story moved you, let me know where you're watching from, or even why it hit close to home. And if it didn't connect with you, I want to hear that too. What's missing? If you're new here and want more stories that don't just inform, but stay with you, don't forget to subscribe.